Hi, everyone. 2 months ago, my newsfeed featured a woman by the name of Sunita Theiss, who left her dream career to care for her family. I was fascinated by this article because the story hit home on a concept that we talk about frequently on this show, burning the corporate ladder due to burnout and finding a greater purpose in life. For short, we call that burning ladders. After conducting some research, I discovered that I was 1 degree of separation from Sunita and that our stories intersect in many various ways. In fact, Sunita and my wife were already connected through their online homeschool community. But what I also learned about Sunita is that she is taking on some major societal systems and norms with a countercultural approach, from the workplace to the church. She has a strong voice for truth, yet her approach is gentle, and her writing is absolutely beautiful and thought-provoking. Here's a brief bio on Sunita. Sunita is a marketing professional turned advocate, speaker, and homeschool parent whose desire is to be a voice for neurodivergent families navigating a world that often misunderstands them. After a decade in a variety of marketing and communication roles, she made an intentional downshift in her career to be more hands-on with her children, an unanticipated but profoundly transformational decision. Along that path, she discovered that both she and her children are neurodivergent, including autism, ADHD, and PDA. This awareness became a catalyst, not only for transforming her family's rhythms in daily life, but also for deepening her own spiritual journey. Today, Sunita is passionate about creating trauma-informed, neurodiversity-affirming spaces in education, faith communities, and family systems. Her work is rooted in redefining and broadening the way we consider concepts like grace, success, and achievement. Whether she's coaching families, consulting with churches, or sharing her story, her message is clear. True inclusion begins with radical compassion, deep listening, and honoring every individual's unique lived experience. Let me add to what Sunita calls lived experience. It's called story. We all have one. This is what Sunita stands for everyone's story to be seen, heard, and valued. I'm going to let Sunita share her full story in this interview being featured today, but I have to say that I have thoroughly enjoyed getting to know her and the voice that she is putting out into the world. Sunita believes in aligning your values with how you spend your time and creating a life that is authentic to who you are. That's what we are about here at Own Your 5 to 9. With that being said, we are going to take a quick break and then we'll dive into the conversation. You are listening to the Work Life Eubiosis podcast with your host, Charleston Edwards. If this is your first time here, welcome. My goal is simple: to eradicate burnout and to bring harmony, purpose, and balance to this world, starting with the family. My hope is that this show and the story shared will provide encouragement and ideas that will be valuable to you on your journey to work-life freedom. So let's dive in to today's episode. Hi, Sunita. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's such a gift to be here.
Well, I am excited to have you here. In the introduction, I gave a brief overview of your burning ladder story, but I would love for you to go deeper. Tell us who you are and a bit about yourself, and then tell us about your transformational story of leaving your dream career to take care of your family.
Yeah, I spent over a decade doing sort of digital marketing, communications, climbing the corporate ladder. I guess by now it's been almost 15 years. I worked in marketing agencies, different corporate roles, government, nonprofits. But as my kids' needs became clearer, I I realized that the pace and structure of my career were just not compatible with the life that my family needed. Um, both of my children are neurodivergent. I'm sure we will get to this later, but we realized I'm neurodivergent too. And and so I just needed to make a downshift. And so I stepped away from that life and I started freelancing. And now I work a very part-time schedule. I had a lot of my identity wrapped up in my career, but I also felt this deep pull to kind of step off the ladder and take a completely different path. And so what followed was kind of messy, but also beautiful. And um, I sort of wholly redefined what we defined as success and purpose. And I think what came out of it was just much more meaningful.
Did you experience burnout of any kind? What was the breaking point?
Um, it was kind of lots of small fracture points along the way. I think there was a lot of tug of war, I guess, between high performance and sort of I worked in social media and digital media, and so there was sometimes demands of like around the clock availability. Um, in the sort of 2012, 2013, like social media was a new business tool, and life at home with a new baby also requires around the clock availability. And so there's this need for like perpetual presence and flexibility and emotional energy. So it wasn't always like a logistical thing, it was like an existential need at times. And so um, it was like a silent burnout. I wanted to be everything to everyone at home and everything to everyone professionally. And we didn't have words like autism and neurodivergence in our family vocabulary, but I think we knew our family needed something different. And I think I also knew like no one was going to rescue us. Um, if you quit a job, the posting goes up. But like if you burn out at home, like there's no job posting for like a mom, right? Like you are the only mom your kid has. And so it wasn't like there wasn't a moment, but it was sort of a realization. And so I knew something needed to change. And so my kid's dad and I decided like I would slowly start making shifts. Um, I was the one who would be having the kids, right? Just sort of biologically, that was what was the reality is that like maternity leave is you lose a quarter professionally, right? And so that affects bonuses, that affects how they assess you. That was just the reality of our life. And so I decided I would shift from a corporate role to a nonprofit. And then in that nonprofit, we identified I was having some fertility issues. And so then I was like, well, I'm going to shift to freelancing. And that's when I decided we were trying to have a second child. And then COVID happened. And so during COVID, everyone was at home and it gave me a lot of freedom to explore what work could look like because everyone was exploring what work could look like during that time.
Right.
And everyone was open to gig work in a way that they weren't. And then I had a very complicated second pregnancy, and then my son got his autism diagnosis. And so I scaled way down at that point just to work less. And so I went from working full time to working like 20 hours a month. And so that just gave me margin. And I had a really amazing client who was that full-time job became a client. And she was like, we don't want to lose you. And so she said, how many hours can you work for us? And then I've continued to work for her, and it's become this like, we will take sort of whatever capacity you have. And so in season one, I've had more capacity. I've been able to work more for them. And when seasons I've had less capacity. And then it's allowed me to also, when I have more capacity, I can take on other work as well. And so I answered that question and then a little more, but like what it's allowed me to do is like realize what's possible in a way that's also allowed me to get clear about like what capacity can actually look like, not just for me, but for my children. As my daughter has gotten older too, and so now, when COVID happened, I had one child who was 2.5, and now I have two kids who are 3 and 7. And I'm fully working for myself at home. And now I'm not just doing freelance marketing, I'm also speaking and I'm writing and
Yeah.
and I'm coaching other parents who are in the same situation. So like the many streams of income have evolved, the way that our life looks has evolved. I'm now homeschooling. And so yeah, it's it's redefined what's possible, and it's redefined how we define success, and how, I'm not as stressed even with my kids about like reading and math milestones and academic milestones, because my professional milestones have shifted too.
Right. I love that story. I will be the first to say that there were many blessings and silver linings that came out of the pandemic.
Yeah.
Your story's not the only one. When everyone was forced to work at home, I think it was a wake-up call to what's really most important in life.
Yeah.
So hearing your transition of taking that realization along with some of the other frictions that were happening and doing something about it. Two, your story shows the power of social capital, the relationship with your boss, now your client, um, being able to come back and say, what part of you can I get? How many hours can you work? That's just amazing. But that also took relationship. It took trust to make that happen. Um, and I love what you said about redefine what's possible and how that now translates into um, a new meaning of success. It sort of flips success on its head. So, with all that being said, what's the biggest misconception being on the other end of this now?
Um, oh man, there are so many. I think, we get caught up in defining success as like the size of your house or the type of car you drive or your title. Um, and or even like my driveway is the bus stop for this part of my neighborhood, right? And like my kids have never ridden a school bus, um, because we've homeschooled all along. And so many mornings, at least one of my kids is still sleeping during the school year when all the neighborhood kids are getting on the school bus. And if I'm awake, like I might be having a cup of coffee or I'm like answering emails or something, and I can look out the window and I can see, like, it's right behind my computer. So I'm pointing, I can like look down the driveway and I can see the kids getting on the bus. And I think like how frantic that time of day would be, and how like we would be rushing to get the kids on the bus, and then I would be like getting in a car, and then I'd be behind that school bus, and then I'd be annoyed that I was stuck behind the school bus that my kids were on. And so I'd be racing to an office, and I would be, and all of that would be because like I had a very specific definition of what it meant to be successful and what it meant to be doing well. And it's fine that that is how many people define what it is to be successful and what it means to be doing well. And
Tell me what's your definition of success now?
some mornings it's just that like we made it through the day with like only one meltdown, or that like we tried a new food, or that like we were able to access all of our safe foods, or that like we um my son is has a lot of hustle, and I don't know where he gets that, and so like he's always like our sort of family microeconomy is like he always wants to be doing things for money, and I don't initiate most of this, and so he will ask like, can I do schoolwork for money? And I'm like, yeah, sure. And so he'll come up with like, if I do 5 pages, I want this. And if I do this, I want this. Or like, I really want you to buy this movie on the TV. So I'm gonna do these things. And I'm like, cool. And I don't really initiate any of it, but he just comes up with these things. And I don't really have like chore charts or any of these things, but he'll come up with like things he wants and how he wants to earn them. And I have not really put any of that into play, but that is how he's kind of he's come up with it on his own. Um and so like those things are cool because those are like he's kind of defining what he thinks a successful day will look like. And he thinks like what a so he's defining success on his own. Like that's really cool.
Hmm.
He's
Wow.
developing his own sort of little internal motivators and then he's getting after them. And like, I didn't do that. That's success. That's really cool.
I I like your definition of success. What I hear is safety,
Yeah.
um, regulation, grounded observation, a sense of peace is success.
Yeah.
Anything,
I'd add the flexibility to that too. There's a
flexible.
maximum amount of flexibility in our house for sure.
So you've touched on this a little bit, and I'm gonna have you go a little bit deeper. As you know, I'm also in a neurodivergent home. Two of my kids are neurodivergent. I believe both my wife and I are neurodivergent. But we find so many more supernatural abilities than disabilities through the neurodivergent. And when this started to take root and sort of blossom, my story is very similar to you. There was a friction with the structure, the demands, the pace of a work life, but there's so much more happening in the home life, and something had to give. So for me, my burning ladder story was everything. Everything had to be put on the table. Our entire lifestyle as a family had to be put on the table. Our activities, our choice in education, how we're educating, our careers, where we're going, our family life, our extended family, the social norms, and even our belief systems. Um, it was a full life reset that happened during the pandemic, a change in work times, workflows, schooling, very similar to you, and ditching the career. And to what you just said, we also had to address our parenting. um, and what those demands, that structure, that very tight structure look like, specifically for our youngest, who's a PDA. And as you are a PDA yourself and also parenting a PDA, possibly two PDAs, can you tell listeners what exactly is PDA and if PDA is sort of the foundation of how you've had to navigate all the systems in your life?
Yeah. So PDA or pathological demand avoidance, some people don't like the word pathological, which I get. You don't want to pathologize your neurotype, right? Some people prefer pervasive drive for autonomy. Some people like persistent desire for autonomy. However, you want to use define the acronym. It's a cluster of traits that is most commonly understood as a profile of autism. Although there's some debate around that. I won't get in the weeds. Basically, it is where the nervous system perceives everyday demands, ordinary demands as a threat. And you basically have a very active or a heightened sort of fight or flight response. So it's not about being oppositional, but it is about survival. In younger kids, especially, this can often look like lashing out in response to everyday things. I've often heard it described as like um just yeah like a heightened like a very heightened threat response. Everything autonomy is just like highly tied to survival. um I've described it as like my kid's brain, my brain, especially with kids, I think, As an adult, once you have a fully developed brain, you can develop skills to help discern. But like just like as if your brain is like a really, really sensitive like smoke detector. So um, I wrote this in a piece at one point. Like imagine that a regular smoke alarm will go off if something is burning in your kitchen, and that is how it that is typical. Like that's what how a typically developing brain might like a neurotypical brain might work. Um, a PDA brain might alert to a threat when a neighbor walks by smoking a cigarette, even if the windows aren't open, just because, right? Because like it's just,
Right.
and that neighbor smoking a cigarette is an ordinary demand. Like you said, put your pants on, right, in the morning, but it's because you made it a demand. Um, so for us, this has meant like we've had to rethink everything, how we parent, how we schedule our days, even how we speak to each other. Like the put your pants on example. So we've had to shift from control to prioritizing connection and collaboration. We're not trying to fix behavior in our house. We are emphasizing co-regulation and honoring autonomy. My kids get a lot of agency in making decisions that I think most kids their age wouldn't. Um, Living with PD often means we can't follow prescriptive or arbitrary schedules, but we can and we do create a lot of rhythms that center on trust and connection. Um, Once I understood PDA and once we identified it and it made so much of my life make sense. Like I wasn't just a kid who had a problem with authority. I was a kid who was just trying to survive. Um, I wasn't a bad kid. I wasn't a difficult kid. I wasn't a kid who just threw tantrums and had meltdowns. Um, I had so much clarity about all the struggles I'd had my entire life. And it also like put into context, like even in my career, I had made these jumps, every like year or two. Um, and people would be like, well, you're doing fine. Like, why are you moving? And I would like cite some issue with like leadership or within the organization, and it would be like a philosophical thing. And I was like, oh, like that's such a PDA thing, right? That you're like, I have this like very nuanced issue with like how this decision was made in this quarter about this financial thing. Because like there's a hard wiring that if you feel like an injustice has been done, however small, you have to like move on.
It's incredible. Um, Everything that you just stated is, I believe, especially in the US, we are quick to misdiagnose. And you said it at the top, opposition versus survival. And a lot of children are quickly diagnosed with ODD,
Right.
when it could very well be a nervous system disorder. It could be a fight for survival. It could be a consistent fight or flight. And we are looking strictly at behavior versus looking at the response and not digging deeper. Um, Two words that I didn't hear you say, but I know it's common in our household, and it will lead to another question I'll get to in a second, but masking and equalizing. How does that play out in your home?
Yeah. In our house, I don't feel like there's a lot of masking that happens, but out in the world, there's a ton of it. I see it a lot in my daughter. I think um, people are always so shocked when I disclose that she has an autism diagnosis. Same thing I get about myself too. I feel like she and I have a lot of similarities. Her referral for an autism diagnosis is what led me to pursue my own. Because I was describing some of the behaviors that I was concerned about. And I suspected I had ADHD forever, but could not get anyone to take me seriously because I was so like, I'm using air quotes, high functioning, and so successful. And my mom was like, "Oh, you did all that stuff as a kid. You walked on your toes. they had me in leg braces at one point because I was walking on my toes and it was affecting my posture and my gait and stuff. And um and I had a lot of sensory issues and I had a lot of issues with dysregulation and meltdowns and like self-harm behaviors and things. And we were seeing a lot of similarities with my daughter and my mom was like, you did all that. And so I called the practice where my kids were, my son was being reevaluated and my daughter was being evaluated. And I said, do you guys evaluate adults? And they said, yeah. And I said, cool, can I also get on the calendar? And they said, sure, mom. Like, come, I don't think it's that uncommon these days. Um, but everyone is shocked when they meet me. Um, because I seem so like normal. And but yeah, so masking is a thing that I see already in my daughter, even though she's very young. But then when we come home, there's this they call it like that restraint collapse. This
Right.
like the huge meltdown. Equalizing we see a lot of especially with my older one with my daughter. I think because at home there's just so much like freedom that there's not a need, but when we have to go out in the world and then come back, you can tell like they've just sort of been like holding it in. And then there's this explosion of equalizing behavior where they need to put everyone back on equal footing. They need to like level everyone out. What I've noticed though is that as my son has gotten older, it's like less physical lashing out and more like goofy pranks and yelling and like a lot of like verbally saying, I want to hit you and I'm not going to, but you've made me really upset and I need you to make it right. So like, which I'll take.
Right. Thank you for answering that. Um, and you're so right. We call it burnout in our house. That after a day of masking, our PDA is at camp this week, and
Yeah.
when she gets home from camp, she needs to regulate. So instead of putting more demands after coming home, we have to create an atmosphere where she can naturally, um, I would say, regulate her nervous system. And part of her having a grounded nervous system is having an environment, having adults. Also, with that nervous system, it could be playfulness. It could be giving her time alone. It could be setting up a strew, letting her have autonomy of how she's going to decompress. Um, and I love what you said, the leveling out, because the leveling out is not happening at home. That's where you will see even more equalizing or lashing out. So, with that being said, you just tell me a little bit more about the day in the life at home, because you mentioned one of the what you've seen the beauty on the other side is the flexibility. So you have demands and structure in all of our society, but then needing an environment where it is hyper flexible. Tell me what flexibility looks like in your home.
Um, I mean, as much as possible, the I feel like our kids get to choose the structure. Um, so I mean it's summer, so that means like my son will say like, what are we gonna do today? And that means like, what are my choices? Um, and so like right now, like we're doing this and then like I have some meetings. And so I have a neighborhood teenager here, like playing with my daughter, and then my son is like playing games on his tablet upstairs. And but there's sort of like activities like around the house for them to engage in. So he can kind of come in and out of whatever he needs to do all day. Um, and meal times in the summer especially are me like I yell lunch break wherever we are in the house right now, that is what we've agreed I will do because he thinks it's funny. So in about an hour and a half, I'm gonna yell lunch break, and then he's gonna tell me what he wants to eat, and I'm gonna prepare it. At some point, that's gonna stop being funny, and I'm gonna not be able to do that anymore. But right now, that is what he finds entertaining. Um, we don't always eat meals together. I ask if they want to. That was kind of a thing we had to let go. Um, for a while, we could eat meals together. We were doing dinners as a family, but we couldn't like all sit and eat. And so there was like Legos on one end of the table. And then we had like conversation cards that, you know, our son would pull and then assign the person who would answer them, right? It wasn't like we could all take turns. He would have someone read it and then he chose who answered it. Um, and so like that's the way like the PDA gets the most autonomy and the most control over like who drives the he gets to drive the conversation. But yeah, so that's kind of our day. And then during the school year, the way we kind of navigate that is like we're part of a few different homeschool co-ops, but we modify it to be as relaxed as possible. And so I kind of lay out like, here are the things I'd like to do today. What order do you want to do them in? And then he dictates the order. We get as much done as we can. If we don't get through it all, that's cool. We have tomorrow. Um, I have a general idea of what we're going to do for the week. I keep it in a binder. Most of it is actually like fun things we can do outside. And then we have like a computer program we use and we have lessons for that. But anything beyond what I have designated for the week, if he wants to do more, he can. He sometimes likes to get it all done in a couple days and then he just likes to chill for the whole week. This year, our daughter is going to be participating in one of our homeschool co-ops as a student as opposed to in the nursery. So we're going to see how that's going to go. Um, I strongly suspect she's also PDA. Like I said, she's a tiny version of me. So we're going to see how that's going to go. I want learning to be fun more than anything. And so if we're not having fun, if we're not interested in just continuing to grow in our knowledge of things and of the world, of how the world works, if learning ever becomes a chore, then we have to stop and we have to pivot what we're doing. The goal is not butts and seats and worksheets completed. And so if it ever starts to feel like that, then I have to shift my approach. I'm not trying to recreate a classroom setting in my house
Exactly.
because that was torture for me. Um, so at the same time, though, I think there are teachers I had in my public school experience who were instrumental in ensuring that like I got through those years. And so, you know, I'm so grateful for those individuals, and I also think that that model did not serve me specifically well, and I'm concerned that it would not have served my kids well. And so we have to be really flexible with how they learn. Yeah, so I just take each year kind of with open hands and yeah. And then we have a really accommodating church. And so like even on like on Sundays when we go to church, like they're super flexible with what our kids need and how they participate as well. Um,
Yeah.
and that's required a lot of us talking to them, asking them for support. Um,
I would love to go deeper there, and I'm going to connect a few dots. Just sort of recap,
yeah,
the first 20, 30 minutes of this conversation. First, you redefine success, and you left that particular pillar of our society. It's not about titles or salary. Then you redefine connection. You even spoke about sitting, our society puts so much emphasis at sitting at the table together. There are many other ways to connect. And the underlying thing that I heard in that was the power of choice, especially for PDAs, right? There's safety and choices versus demands. And then you just redefine learning, right? It's not sitting behind a desk, that it could be child directed, following the child's interests, and it's fun, right? And then here's the fourth pillar, you're bringing up church,
Yeah.
right? And church also has infrastructures, it has schedules, it has um, some very neurotypical thinking in the church. And so uh, I know in our initial meeting we talked about what needs to change there, and you said redefine grace, right? So redefine connection, redefine learning, redefine success and achievement, and now redefine grace. Can you elaborate on your relationship with your church and your vision, because you're doing a lot of advocacy work in the faith-based community around neurodivergence?
Yeah. Yeah, I've thought about this a lot since our last conversation too. So I think grace has to mean more than sort of, I think in many church contexts, grace means like forgiveness for like a moral failure. That's a lot of the time when people think of that word, that's how they define it. And often it feels performative. Um, and I think it has to be radical and it has to be accommodating and it has to be tender and dignifying to the person receiving it as well as the person extending it. Um, it probably needs to not make sense to someone looking in from the outside. Um, for me personally, that has looked like um, when my kid is having a hard time in the service, not staring, but um, asking him if he wants a cookie and taking him by the hand and handing him some Oreos and just hanging out with him, you know? Because to someone on the outside, that looks like you're rewarding bad behavior, right? That doesn't make sense. But what that was a kid, a neurodivergent child, having a hard time with the sounds and the structure and the sitting still because his body just needed to move. And the person saw a child who they remember just likes to run in the hallways sometimes and who showed up late and didn't get to have the five cookies that they know that they mom and dad always agree he gets before and after the service. So what they did was they went, I got him. He didn't get his cookies. I understand. And they did that, right? Or a little girl who is trying to sit still and mom is going to walk her around. We go to an Anglican church and so they have the Stations of the Cross, all the 12 images carved in wood. And so of Jesus going to the cross hung up in our church, and I will walk around with her in the sanctuary and people will see me carrying my daughter, especially when she was younger, and we'll walk through and they'll just hear this little tiny voice go, that's Jesus really loudly. And that's disruptive, but also like what a gift that there is a child who can look at these depictions of this extremely tragic thing happening in the gospel story, and she can look and she goes at 2, she knows that that's Jesus.
Mm,
Shouldn't you go, wow,
right, right.
that's beautiful that that child can look at that picture and she knows that something profound is happening? I,
Jesus then said to his disciples, don't hold back the kids, right? He invited,
let children come to me.
yes.
That in Jesus's day, kids were seen as less than human. And so I think a church that is truly inclusive should should not be an institution that demands conformity. It should be a refuge for the weary. It should be, I mean, maybe it means that we change how we preach, how we structure services, how we interact in small groups. But I mean, frankly, I thought it shouldn't just be limited to our faith spaces, right? Like what we hear on Sundays, what we experience on Sundays should be transforming how we engage our culture as a whole for the better. Churches right now have a pretty bad rap in society.
Right.
So if we're redefining success, maybe we need to be redefining success as wholeness. If we're redefining achievement, maybe we need to be redefining achievement as alignment. And if we're going to redefine grace, maybe we need to talk about it in the context of making room for everyone to belong exactly as they are.
Hmm.
Maybe we need to redefine grace as a posture towards the world that is just open arms. Let the
Jesus,
little children
Jesus,
come to me.
right. Jesus summarized the commandments into two things: love God and love others.
Right,
And as we both know, love is unconditional.
right,
That's radical grace.
right.
You've dropped a few mics and all the things we need to redefine and rethink. And I am appreciative of a voice to the faith-based community of what grace looks like. And I know you're um, doing some excellent work with your current church. Um, what's been the biggest challenge?
Um, I mean, I think sort of broadly, a big challenge I see in a lot of faith-based spaces is inertia. I think a lot of times, I don't know if it's fear or just an unwillingness or people get held up by budgets or there are competing priorities. But like or people feel like it dilutes the message. But I think that like people get stuck and they don't move forward on being more inclusive. And so it doesn't have to be expensive to be inclusive. You don't need an elaborate sensory room. You don't need um, to spend thousands and thousands of dollars. Sometimes it's just like changing your posture in the way that you greet people. Sometimes it's just a different message preached on Sunday mornings. Sometimes it's just a realignment in a staff meeting that trickles down to the way that volunteers are being told to greet people, that trickles down to the way people feel when they come in, the way that people talk to each other. That doesn't cost anything.
Hmm.
So I think it's just if you're going to create belonging for the people who feel left out, and then you're helping people unlearn what they've been taught about what it means to be normal, that doesn't need to cost any money. I can't remember where I read it, but overwhelmingly churches feel like they're doing a good job being inclusive of people with disabilities. And overwhelmingly, families of individuals with disabilities don't feel included and they're not coming to church. So that disconnect can be addressed simply by picking up the phone and inviting someone to church and then actually making them feel welcome.
So many questions looming in my head, and I know we have some time constraints today. So um, I'm gonna fumble my way through this question. You know, we, as I think about the purpose of the church, is to build a community as a place to come worship, um, a place to be reminded. It's a place to learn. There's many different purposes of the body of Christ. And I think about Paul's writings of the many different parts of the body that are all given special gifts. So we've talked about this. It's been a theme of the conversation around neurodiversity, and the neurodivergent is part of the body of the Christ. So is one of the hurdles in the church is not understanding the gifts behind neurodivergence.
Mhm.
Can you take that and then elaborate?
Yeah, I mean, I'm like, how do I briefly summarize disability theology in like 2 seconds? I think for a lot, and I'm not sure where this has come from, so I don't want to misspeak, but somewhere along the way, we got this idea that to be different, and this is endemic to I think like sort of every world religion, and I think this is sort of it's very human that if because we are inherently tribal, right? That if someone is different from us, they are a threat or they are our brains have to solve for this, right? Like, and so neurodivergence, disability, um, however you want to define it, that is bad. And we've attributed that to sin. I mean, even in scripture, right? People are like, who sinned, this man or his parents, right? And Jesus is like, nobody, guys, you know. And so I think people have been resistant to understanding it because they've wanted to say this is evidence that the world has fallen. This is because of sin. This is broken. I hear from parents who are like, my kid's not saved because they're autistic, right? And you're just like, no, 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 that doesn't make any sense. Your kid can fully know and love Jesus, even if they're autistic, especially because they're autistic.
Yes.
They are image bearers of God just as much as you are. And so I think that's a hurdle that needs to be overcome.
Yes.
Um, so I think that's one thing that's probably a roadblock. I mean, I've had the privilege of getting to know a couple of autistic pastors in the last few years, which is amazing. And so I think that change is happening in the church. Um, we've been quicker, I think, to embrace, in some ways, I guess, quicker pastors with acquired disabilities, right? Someone who was maybe a pastor and then they had an accident and they are now on a wheelchair, right? Um, but people who were born with physical disabilities, they're facing some of the same challenges. And so I think I think it's just overcoming these misconceptions that those differences are because God sees them as somehow less than people who don't have disabilities, people who are neurotypical is the hurdle. And I also think the impetus shouldn't be on neurodivergent and disabled people to prove otherwise.
Right.
And yet it often seems to be. I think there's a lot of things that overlap with like, I think that's why disability theology, a lot of it has been born out of like liberation theology, like the writings that come out of that movement, because there's so much overlap. And now I'm getting really in the weeds, so I'm probably going to stop there. But it's really there's a lot of cool stuff being done, and there's a lot that still needs to be done. Is probably the most concise way to put that.
No, thank you. Thank you for answering that. Um, Very graceful. As I mentioned to you before, you're so gentle in your responses. So I know we're getting close to the end, and I want to bring this back to parents of neurodivergent children, or parents that who are also neurodivergent, who's listening to this. They are in a career, but they are feeling the pull, the friction that we both had 4 or 5 years ago, where we made a choice to have more of a hands-on approach at home, which meant we had to sacrifice. We had to sacrifice climbing the ladder. What advice do you have for working parents advancing in their careers who may be experiencing some sort of neurodivergent in their home, either in themselves and or in their children? What's your advice? And I know every story is different, every circumstance is different, but what's some basics that you can give to any listeners right now?
Yeah, so for the parents who are experiencing burnout, or I mean, even just generally like reassessing values, I would say you're not failing, um, but your environment might just be unsustainable. I think burnout in your career often happens when your values and your reality are out of sync. And so if you find yourself in that place, my advice would be to pause and ask yourself. I mean, I would literally write this down. What am I trying to prove? Who am I trying to please? And then what would it look like to build a life that works for me and my family, not works against us? Um, and I would get as specific as possible. And then I would say, what does it look like to feel peaceful? Again, get as specific as possible. And then I would work backwards. Um, I think it was the Amazon folks who have a book called Working Backwards, and like it's like their product team, and they literally get like ridiculously specific, and they like stair step it back like every step of the process in their product dev journey, so that it's like, we're popping bottles at the end of this launch. Like, what do we need to do? And then like 1 degree back, like what have we done? One step back from there, what have we done? One step back from there, what have we done? And like reverse engineer it. And
Yes.
so like do that for your family life. You don't have to only do this professionally. Like, and obviously like you're neurodivergent, so like it's not gonna be perfect, but like, 5 years from now, if you want to be working half time, how much money do you need in the bank?
Hmm.
And if you need that much money in the bank, what are you doing now that's keeping you from getting there? For me, that meant like I couldn't stop at Starbucks on the way to work, or it meant that like I had to go to, like, we couldn't put our kid in the daycare that was next to my office because Atlanta daycares were more expensive than the ones in the suburbs near where we lived. It meant that like we chose to live in the suburbs instead of closer to work. It meant that like we bought used cars with cash instead of a car payment. It meant, like that, like there were choices you could make all along the way to make your life more affordable so that you could save more, so that 5 years from now you could sustain your life on a single income or one and a half incomes. And like that's a super privileged position to be in. And I know that because like right now life is expensive. The world is expensive. Right? Like we were in a position in 2017 to buy a house. And so now we're not contending with these interest rates. And I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge the kind of privilege it took to do that when there are people who are barely scraping by. And there were sacrifices we had to make even then. There are sacrifices I'm making even now. And so I think identifying what your life looks like, where you can make those shifts. Is it that you're gonna, you know, you can drive Uber on your drive home. You can set so that you're only picking up people on your route on your drive home from work
Hmm.
or whatever. Like it's
Yes.
like there's stuff like that that like you can do
Yeah.
to just like make a few extra bucks. Like it's they're little things to save money along the way. Um, my daughter lives only in hand-me-downs right now from a friend. Like because kids' clothes are expensive and they burn through them every 3 months. And um, all that to say, like, identify what those shifts are to build a life that works for you. And it's not going to be immediate and it's exhausting.
Yeah.
And eventually you identify what those shifts are. And some of them are internal shifts too. Is it a mindset shift that you just need to be making? For me, some of it was both. There was a lot of therapy I had to do, and there were external shifts. And eventually the change happens. But if you don't start honoring your exhaustion as a signal,
Hmm.
as opposed to a flaw, because being tired is not a flaw. It is a sign from your brain and your body that something needs to change and your environment is not sustainable. So that is my advice.
Another mic drop. Sunita, thank you. So I think this is my last question, but your last answer has me redefining purpose. Purpose can easily be tied to success, right? Purpose is just one of those big words that everyone wants meaning, and with meaning comes success. But yeah, I would argue that purpose has nothing to do with success um, in the way that the world looks at it. Um, I think purpose is staying on a path that you're supposed to be on. And some of this, God sees that path and we are just sort of walking in it. And as I think about your story and how you've told it, you're walking in your purpose. It has looked different from corporate to nonprofit to home, to how you're parenting your kids, to advocacy for the church. Like there's purpose behind all of that that has looked completely different. But sometimes purpose could be as simple as being a safe place for your kid. That's purpose, right? So a lot of people that are listening to this are seeking purpose. And you just answered this of what does that transition look like? But can you tag on to this and talk about your purpose and then tell us what's next for you as well as you are going on your life journey?
Yeah. I think my purpose is always, I think, as I've sort of come to more clearly define it, it's always just been to help others feel safe, seen, heard, and loved, I think. I think most clearly in this season that's been with my kids, but I think more broadly that comes out in the work I've done to advocate for others, especially in neurodivergent spaces and advocacy spaces. And then the other part of your question was like what I'm working on. What was
Yeah,
sorry.
what's next for you?
Yeah, what's next? Yeah, so I'm hosting a workshop next month in August for Christian families of PDA kids. So it'll be online. I can, after this call, actually email you a code if you want to put it in your
Absolutely.
show notes to give folks a discount. So kind of just taking a biblical perspective of PDA. So a lot of times people see this um as bad kids, as bad behavior, but I actually think there's a way for us to look at how scripture talks about children and parenting and apply that to the way we're parenting our PDA kids. And so that's on my website. I will send you the link as well as a code if any of your listeners might be interested in doing that. We can do a little discount. I also host regular writing workshops for parents of neurodivergent kids. So I found that I love to write, but I was not setting aside time for it. So they've been really just lovely, gentle spaces. Frequently tears are shed during these workshops, but just to come and share, a lot of PDA moms have come to these workshops. And also just I try to write a lot about experiences of faith, of neurodivergence, of making shifts in my career. I know there's a book in there somewhere. I'm working on it. Just, yeah, I'm trying to stay open to what unfolds, but anchoring in advocacy, healing, just trying to be authentic to whatever is in front of me. If folks want to connect everywhere, I'm just Sunita Theiss on Instagram, on Substack. My website is sunitatheiss.com. So, yeah.
Thank you, Sunita. I love that. Remain authentic to what's in front of you. That's purpose. Thank you for being part of this conversation, being part of this podcast today. I believe you have many books in front of you, but let's just get one off, one completed first, and then we'll worry about the rest. But thank you. I hope that you can come back to the Work-Life Eubiosis and continue this conversation. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much.
All right. I hope you enjoyed this interview as much as I did. We're going to take a quick break, and I'll be back to summarize some of the golden nuggets Sunita shared. And we'll also provide the discount code for her upcoming workshop for families navigating PDA. We'll be right back. This episode is brought to you by Own Your 5 to 9, an organization committed to freeing families of the rat race and burnout. Every organization has a leader, mission, and a set of values that drives the organization. But this is commonly missed in the most important organization in the world, the family. An organization has one mission for how it will impact the world. Why not the family? An organization goes into strategic planning routinely to align its values, mission, and projects. Why not the family? Whose Home, a strategic planning guide for families, is a workbook and a tool needed in all households. Whose Home takes a strategic planning approach with 10 guided exercises to define your core family values, family mission, and tools to operationalize how your family does life together. If your family is facing a big decision, Whose Home is for you. If you're considering a career pivot, Whose Home is also for you. If you desire more intentionality and harmony in your home, Whose Home is for you. Create a healthy culture, not a hustle culture, at home. Visit ownyour5to9.com to claim your copy today. Welcome back. Before we move on, you can find out more information about Sunita at sunitatheiss.com. That's SUNITATHEISS.com. And if you click on resources of her website, you will find her upcoming workshop for PDA families happening on August 14th. Sunita has given us the code WORKLIFE for a generous discount. Again, sunitatheiss.com. And lastly, I wanted to summarize the valuable wisdom and mic drops Sunita shared. We redefined a lot of terms that we clothe ourselves in as a society. Success, achievement, education, busyness, and grace. And if there was one thing that stood out the most that Sunita mentioned, it was this statement. Let's redefine success as wholeness. Let's redefine achievement as alignment. Let's redefine grace as belonging, just as we are. Grace is a posture toward the world with open arms. Thank you for listening to the Work-Life Eubiosis podcast, part of the Work-Life resources created by Own Your 5 to 9. I hope that you have found encouragement and a few ideas to strengthen your journey to purpose, freedom, and balance. Have you overcome burnout and found a new way of life? Millions around the globe are still at the risk of burnout and losing it all. And your story may be the one that sparks not only a dream, but action. Visit ownyour5to9.com for more information and submit your story. While you're there, join the Work Life Ubiosis newsletter and receive additional resources weekly right to your inbox. If you enjoy this podcast, take time to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. Share it with a friend or loved one. Remember, the most important organization in the world is the family. Let's do our part to strengthen it. Thank you for listening.